Good day everyone, this is Nemesis and today I have some bad news and some good news. So I finished making the final modifications on the new hybrid build. I also finished the PvP build as well. I just haven't had time to make an actual video guide to it because it's a bit tricky. It's a very different playstyle to my old Fear build, and I also got a lot of footage piled up again. But hopefully next week I will somehow find the time to make a proper guide. Anyway, as I was going about testing the new content and gathering golden materials for my new hybrid, as well as testing it out, I've noticed that most of the things that I was always concerned about have come true. So the topic of today is the current state of PvE in Guild Wars 2, with special attention offered to the so-called berserker meta. So what exactly is this berserker meta? Well, the short answer would be, according to some people, only half the classes in the game are even considered viable, and only when using a single specific power type build out of the entire spectrum of build diversity, and while having equipped only one gear set out of the 24 possible sets that we have at our disposal. It is kind of weird when you put it like that, isn't it? And it gets even worse. But before we get into that, we need to understand how this whole thing started in the first place. Guild Wars 2 was supposed to be groundbreaking, and it actually was, just got ruined along the way. It was initially advertised as the MMORPG that will finally break away from the limitations of the Holy Trinity, and at the same time put an end to grinding. Also possible future esport. A very tall task, one that would require nothing less than the most advanced and well-theory crafted build system ever made. And it's delivered. Guild Wars 2, in my opinion, was the first MMORPG to successfully break away from the old Holy Trinity system and all of its flaws. Every single class could be either DPS or tank or support, and they also took it one step further by dividing all the damage in the game into 6 well-defined categories. We had range DPS or melee DPS, immediate power type DPS or overtime condition type DPS, and for the first time ever, there was a clear structure for AoE DPS versus single target DPS. They also moved diminishing return effects from passive to active by implementing a mechanic called stability. They had this duality system of buffs, debuffs, each one having a counterpart, removed the taunt mechanic. Basically a lot of ingenious things that had multiple positive implications, which I will not go into right now. So how do we get from this to the berserker meta? What went wrong? Well, the initial feedback was amazing and the game really took off at launch. I was there in the beginning and there were millions of us on the map. We went through the game at an alarming rate, and it wasn't long before the more hardcore players acquired the best gear in the game, since the majority of the dungeons were very easy, and there was nothing left to do. There was no end game for us. Was it because of a lack of a budget or time to focus on better endgame content? Or was it a calculated decision not to provide very difficult content so that people are not overwhelmed while they make the transition from the old Trinity system into something significantly different? I have no idea. What was certain is that, according to ArenaNet officials, they did not expect people to go through the game this fast. So now they had to finish polishing up the game and fixing the bugs while providing new endgame relatively close to launch, and also focus on making some trivial content to which they can attach new skins and other cosmetics so that they will have funds to actually run their company on. And they did that. They rushed out fractals well ahead of their time alongside the ascended gear type. Now, meanwhile, due to the lack of new content or endgame or any form of competitive play, the more hardcore players started doing the only thing that they could do, which was grind the old dungeons. It gave loot, so... And because the dungeons were never hard, it was never a question of if you can finish it. It was more of a how fast can you do it. More fast, more loot. In this repetition, players eventually realize that they can entirely skip certain areas of the dungeon to be even faster. That eventually escalated into skipping the better part of the dungeon and only fight when they have to trigger certain events in order to get the loot at the end. And just when you think it can't get any worse than this, some people took it to the next level and started going through the map, like actually going through the walls. Now, how can you do it even faster? Well, in addition to skipping 80% of the fights in a dungeon, players realize that when they do actually have to fight, they can abuse the poorly scripted AI to obtain even more effectiveness. And thus, the corner stacking concept was born. Now, what you guys have to understand is that the build system was also balanced around PvP. For example, if you go full offensive with a greatsword in hand and you try to whack someone, by the time you actually get to hit him, you would have already taken like 4 or 5 shots to the face, no pun intended. So of course the melee glass cannon will hit significantly higher than the range glass cannon to compensate for the lack of DPS uptime. Otherwise, why would you even consider going in melee in the first place if you do the same damage but take more risk and it takes a while to get to your opponent? And thus, balance. Now, if you abuse the poorly scripted AI, instead of going towards the mobs and getting hit along the way, you can get the mobs to come to you, around the corner. And all of the risk is gone. You now have 100% DPS uptime when you shouldn't. This is further amplified by the fact that mob reaction time is not instant, so that you would have a chance to get to them, which, while corner stacking, translates to a second of targeting before they actually start to attack, giving the players a chance to burst them down without retaliation. So, no danger while engaging and free bursting. This method skyrocketed way out of proportion the effectiveness of bursting over any other playstyle, as well as the value of party-wide buffs for the duration of the bursting. But wait, it gets worse. They also abuse certain spells as well as the terrain to either render certain bosses inert via perma-CC or other forms of bugging, and thus giving themselves 100% DPS uptime as the boss just stands there like a target dummy, or stack all the AoE damage into a single point via glitching or the options menu to obtain exponentially higher bursting capabilities. Now, I am all for effectiveness, but there is such a thing as crossing the line when you are too effective. That will ultimately lead to imbalance and a whole lot of problems, which I will get to in a few moments. So this, my friends, is how the berserker meta got born, and with it the self-proclaimed top players of Guild Wars 2. Now, I'm not going to say players shouldn't have opted for the most effective ways to play the game, because that's obviously not going to happen, but they could have kept it real and call it exactly what it is. Maybe even demand balance. But instead, for the sake of internet fame, they invented the absurd concept of speedruns, which basically translates into, look how pro we spend the majority of our time in a dungeon running instead of fighting until we reach the boss, where we use the correct mechanics to freeze the boss. By the way, all bosses that cannot be frozen or turned into a vegetable in some way need to be balanced, while we do insane DPS, not burst, DPS, so that in the end we finish the dungeon in 3 minutes. They made websites where, instead of letting people know the full story of when, how and why you can use bursting, they declared bursting as DPS. They shoved a lot of math in people's faces and declared that only half the classes in the game are viable, and only when using a single specific power type build out of the entire spectrum of build diversity, and while having equipped only 1 gear set out of the 24 possible sets that we have at our disposal. They would have you believe that this weird camera corner stacking crap is actually working as intended. That ArenaNet broke free from the Holy Trinity system into something less complex as in DPS only, Unity, and developed one of the most sophisticated build system ever made, backed up by 24 different stat combinations because, I don't know, they were bored. Zerker knob only. Zerker only knob. Yeah, I'm sure. Now, there are still people that know everything I have said so far, but sadly, there are not that many left. The majority actually believes that the content which cannot be abused is imbalanced and needs to be fixed. They wait and they wait and they wait for 15 minutes in LFG to get that perfect meta party, even though there was no way my presence there would have slowed down the team by 15 minutes, only to die non-stop when they cannot abuse the game, have like 30% DPS uptime, and yet still be permabuffed through the power of, and do so much more damage. Even the best players, this was by far the best fractal group I was in, even the best players think that not all classes are equal, necromancers are stupid, and Zerker meta haters should be banned. They actually managed to turn this into the most delusional gaming community I have ever seen. And I didn't even realize how bad it was until I saw the comments in the chat during ArenaNet's reveal of the new build system on Twitch. There were so many people saying, rip this build and rip that build and rip that other build. It's an expansion. Of course, all previous builds will become obsolete. But of course, the self-proclaimed top players will never admit these facts. They would lose their top player status and just be exploiters instead. And there are also those who still believe they are making a profit out of this. If you can do a dungeon in 5 minutes, so can everyone else. The profit you are making is worthless. People really don't understand gaming anymore. I heard someone who was bragging that he did Citadel of Flame dungeon over 25,000 times. And at that point I just went to grab something to eat before my mouth turns around and tries to eat my brain. 25,000 COF runs. Gaming used to be about overcoming a challenge through skill. The more difficult the challenge, the more satisfied you felt when you finally succeeded. What am I supposed to feel when I stand in a corner a few 100,000 times and spam 3 buttons? What? I get more loot? It's meaningless because everyone else can do that as well. It's basically a game of who has more patience to do the same shit over and over and over and over and over again. And for what? Skins? I'd rather spend that time working out and make myself look pretty. Unlike other theory crafters or self-proclaimed top players, I have not jumped the Zerker meta bandwagon and start advertising this toxic gameplay, because besides the fact that I stand on principle, I also invested 2 years of my life into this game and I actually wanted to succeed. That's why I've made this video, that's why I always spoke out in favor of build diversity, more meaningful content and balance. Everything I did so far was always for the benefit of the community and the game. I've always known that it was only a matter of time before people get tired of all of these issues, and what you have to understand is that outsiders don't really know what is what. They just see a bunch of people running from corner to corner, then clumping over each other and some numbers appear on screen. They don't know if that damage is high or not. All they see is something that looks boring. And that is exactly how you don't attract new people to a game. It's bad advertising, which I did not want to be a part of. Can you even imagine in World of Warcraft, which was the most successful MMORPG of all times, that's why I use it as an example, when the Ice Crown Citadel first came out, imagine players being able to run past all the monsters inside, all the way up to the Lich King and burst him down in 30 seconds while he just sits there frozen like a target dummy. Can you imagine the feedback, the shock, the terror. People would immediately sue Blizzard. Their stock market would collapse overnight, there would be riots in the streets.
The skies shall rain fire, and the seas will become as blood.
There was this one time in World of Warcraft when a guild used a questionable mechanic to defeat the Lich King. A few hours later, the entire guild got banned. The servers went down for emergency maintenance and the mechanic got removed. And on the other hand, in Guild Wars 2, you can still destroy gigantic Lupicus by reflecting his own damage back to him. So this is basically how you end up with a little over 20,000 interested viewers on average on your official YouTube channel, 60,000 viewers on live stream, and even though at least 3.5 million people bought Guild Wars 2, their expansion announcement video only posed interest to 400,000 people. By all accounts, I shouldn't even be making Guild Wars 2 videos at this point. I should focus on something more popular. But hopefully soon such things will not matter. Now, why didn't ArenaNet say anything? Well, what were they supposed to say? Hey you, stop exploiting our bugged game due to a lack of endgame content. Nah, they could have never spoke against it, especially since it occurred naturally and people seem to be going for it. It kept the game alive for a little while longer, which was still better than the alternative, like what happened to Star Wars. Why didn't they do anything? Well, like I said, in the beginning they had other priorities, but unfortunately, meanwhile everything just spiraled out of control to a point where fixing it would be problematic. Judging by all the footage you saw on screen until now, can you imagine what would happen if ArenaNet suddenly decided to fix everything and remove corner stacking, which totally imbalances the game? People suddenly losing the ability to do 1,000,000 dungeons per day and grind themselves into an early grave? They would scream it's unfair. They would demand trial by combat. Just like they did when ArenaNet did a rollback in the beginning, which fixed a lot of the abuses that were done due to a major exploit. The problem is they still have to do something. I've always wondered, why is ArenaNet focusing only on skins and quality of life improvements while their game is slowly running into the ground? Don't they have a plan? And then I saw the expansion. And now for the good news. Mind you, this is more speculation than actual facts, but then again, I was kind of right about the berserker meta. So maybe, hopefully, I will be right about this as well. It wasn't so much about the expansion as it was about the live stream presentation. I heard the magic words during the stream at least 5 times. Those words were, and I'm quoting, "I'm going to tell you guys right now that this ability, doesn't matter which one, is not going to do the same damage as before. It was simply too powerful." Now I don't know about you guys, but that sounds like balance to me. Not only that, but one could argue that ArenaNet is already starting to make the transition, or at least test the feedback on content which, in my personal opinion, is better than what we had until now. We got a taste of some new jaw-dropping areas, as well as an alternative approach to combat, courtesy of the fragile and infiltration mechanics. I also greatly enjoyed the new epic confrontations designed to be a greater challenge for solo players, if they wish to obtain all the achievements and therefore all the rewards. And yes, finally a little bit more meaningful rewards for tougher content. It seems they are also scouting out the possibility to revamp some of the older events into this format. I heard some far better voice acting.
My people came to the desert and built a great temple. For while we labored, we were set upon by the stewards of the desert, the forgotten. They slaughtered my people, and now another ghost sits upon my throne. I beseech you, help me return to the temple.
Significantly more meaningful plot.
I will bear your pain, sister. Hurry!
And last but definitely not least, more delicious cutscenes.
Please, I must share something with you. Share something with you. I'm fading.
I'm not going to go into more details or speculation until we have some more reliable and definitive information, because it has no point. But I will say this: what better way to fix the berserker meta and finally provide diversity and balance so that their game can once again start to grow, without angering the people that still remain and enjoy the berserker meta endless grind, the people who believe necromancers are stupid and berserker meta hitters should be banned, as if they even know what the word meta means, then by doing a complete system revamp, improving on every aspect of it, and also providing new content for players to actually use that build system in the form of raids. If there is ever a time to do all of these things, an expansion would be it. It all makes sense now, how the berserker meta got started, why ArenaNet seemed to be focusing mostly on quality of life improvements instead of addressing the issues that were plaguing PvE or balancing PvP, why they didn't even say anything. Once the hype was gone, maybe they had more to lose with very little to gain if they invested a lot of resources into gradually fixing things. The berserker meta actually kept the game alive long enough until they can release the expansion. Because one does not simply release an expansion overnight. Which means I should have actually joined the berserker meta crusade. Nah. ArenaNet has a chance to turn this around if they stay true to the "we will change this because it was too effective", and also slowly phase out the effectiveness of corner stacking and introduce a damage meter, which by the way is already in the game in PvP. People will always be competitive, and we've already seen what the lack of a damage meter can do to a community that doesn't understand that this is not 13,000 DPS. It just leads to hate, discrimination between classes, delusional elitism, and an overall extremely toxic gaming environment. On the other hand, with a damage meter, players would have the tools necessary to better put into practice theory-crafted builds, since sometimes there is a significant difference between theory and practice. It will also provide undeniable proof of the value of support or bunker type builds in certain situations, so that not only will players come to realize the genius design behind the build system, but it will also make for a much more enjoyable overall gaming experience. If what we've seen so far in Season 2 of the Living Story was just a taste of what is to come, Heart of Thorns could be Guild Wars 2 endgame, the one it never had. And with it, they can make Guild Wars 2 kind of the only MMORPG out there worth playing. And I intend to be there when it comes out. Speaking of that, I also finished setting up all the details on my major upcoming project, and I will soon be ready to move forward with my plans. Just took significantly longer than I originally planned because I wanted everything to be perfect. And I was neglecting some of my other duties, and I had to take a break for a while again. Also, hopefully I will be able to release at the same time my new PvP build. It's been finished for over a month now, and I was really looking forward to share it with you guys. But I almost forgot. I need some help recording some footage for the new hybrid build in Fractal's difficulty scale 50. If anyone is playing a condition or support mesmer, I just need you in my group for the confusion stacking. If you want to participate, send me an email in-game or leave a message in the comment section below.